The F-16 was dead on the tarmac. They froze when the legendary veteran fixed it alone. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was an unusually hot morning at the airfield. The sun beat down on the tarmac, reflecting off the F-16 fighter jet, which sat motionless, its engines cold. A team of technicians gathered around, their faces a mixture of frustration and disbelief. Despite their best efforts, the aircraft refused to start. The digital systems told them everything was fine, but they knew better. Nothing worked. It was as if the jet had simply given up. The crew tried everything, from rechecking fuel levels to replacing parts, but the F-16 remained still, a silent testament to their failure. "We've got a problem," one of the techs muttered, wiping the sweat off his brow. He kicked the side of the jet with frustration. Nearby, another tech checked his tablet for diagnostics, but the results came back the same. "It's the engine. We can't get it started." Just as the air seemed to thicken with the weight of their failure, an older man walked onto the scene. He wasn't wearing the usual flight suit or military gear. Instead, he wore a faded olive-green jacket and a simple pair of jeans, his steps slow but deliberate. He wasn't a part of the team, at least not officially. The young technicians exchanged glances, sizing him up. "Can I help you?" one of them asked, his tone a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. The old man didn't answer immediately. He just stood there, looking at the F-16, his eyes focused. Then he finally spoke. "I used to work on jets like this," he said quietly. His voice, though raspy, had a weight to it that made the techs pause. He wasn't just anyone. One of the younger engineers scoffed, rolling his eyes. "We've got this covered, old man. This is a state-of-the-art machine, not some relic from the past." The older man didn't flinch. He just looked at the jet, his hands slowly moving toward the engine. "You're missing something," he said softly. The techs watched in disbelief as he knelt down by the engine, inspecting it with a keen eye. He wasn't using any high-tech diagnostic tools or modern equipment. His hands moved with a practiced ease, and the air around him seemed to grow still. One of the engineers watched for a moment before chuckling to himself. "This guy is a joke. We've got billion-dollar equipment, and he thinks he can fix it with his bare hands." But as the old man worked, a strange calm settled over the area. He looked at the engine, then at a small panel on the side, one that the technicians had overlooked. With a simple turn of his hand, he removed the panel, revealing a part that had clearly been damaged. The younger tech's attitude quickly shifted as he saw what the old man had found. "What the?" he murmured under his breath. The old man turned to him. "You didn't check the fuel regulator. It was short-circuiting." The technician stared at him, shocked. It was something so simple, yet so crucial. He had no idea how the veteran had spotted it without the modern tools they had been using. Just as the technician started to step forward, one of the senior engineers approached, his face tense. "What's going on here? Who let this guy onto the flight line?" But the old man simply looked up, his face calm. "Just fixing what you missed," he replied. And then, without hesitation, he replaced the part, tightening it down with an old-fashioned wrench. The engine's lights flickered to life, and within moments, the F-16 roared back to life, its engines humming with power. The technicians stood frozen, their mouths agape. The veteran stood up slowly, his job complete. There was no fanfare, no applause. Just a quiet acknowledgement of a job well done. "We'll need to call the general," one of the senior techs muttered, still in disbelief. But the old man was already walking away, as though this was just another day's work. The jet was ready, but the real lesson had only just begun. The technicians stood still trying to process what had just happened. The F-16 roared to life, its engines firing up with a smoothness that only a perfectly maintained machine could achieve. For a moment, the noise drowned out everything else, the hum of the jet's turbines reverberating through the airfield. The old man, with his quiet and unassuming presence, had fixed the most advanced piece of military equipment with nothing but his knowledge and experience. The young engineers exchanged uncertain glances, their pride bruised, but their admiration for the veteran growing. One of them, A junior tech finally spoke up. How did you know? The old man, who had already turned to walk away, paused. He didn't look back at the group of engineers, but his words were clear. Experience, he said simply. Experience is something you can't measure with a machine. With that, he began to walk towards the hangar, his pace steady, his back straight. The technicians followed him with their eyes, some of them still trying to grasp the gravity of the situation. No one had expected a man like him, someone with no flashy gear, no fancy tools, to fix the jet when their best technology had failed. The senior technician who had been leading the crew, a man in his 40s, walked up to the jet and placed his hand on its wing. I'll admit it, he said to no one in particular. I didn't think it could be done. We had all the tools. We had all the data. He paused for a moment, reflecting. But the man had something we didn't. He didn't rely on data. He relied on what he knew. The young technician, who had mocked the veteran earlier, now looked up at the older man. We never should have doubted him. You can't doubt experience, the senior tech replied, his voice heavy with realization. But that's something you only learn with time. Meanwhile, the old man had entered the hangar, his hands moving with practiced precision as he grabbed a wrench and began to pack it into his weathered tool bag. The sound of the engines outside was muffled now, but the satisfaction of hearing the jet fire up remained in his chest. It wasn't just the engine he'd fixed today. It was the respect he had earned from an entire team that had initially doubted him. As he closed his tool bag, he heard the clatter of boots on the hangar floor. He turned to see a young officer approaching, his uniform sharp and pristine, his expression serious. Excuse me, sir, the officer said, standing at attention. The general is asking for you. The old man raised an eyebrow. The general? He asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and disbelief. The officer nodded. Yes, sir. He's been briefed about your work today. Well, the old man said with a quiet chuckle. I didn't expect to get a call from the general. He stood up, his knees creaking slightly, but he moved with the same calm confidence as before. Lead the way. As the officer turned and walked down the hall, the veteran followed behind, his mind already drifting back to the countless hours he had spent fixing engines and machinery in far more dangerous circumstances. This wasn't the first time he had been recognized for his skills, but it was still an honor to see that his experience still carried weight. When they reached the command center, the officer opened the door and stepped aside. The old man entered, and the room fell silent as soon as he did. At the far end of the room, behind a large oak desk, sat a tall, imposing figure. The general. The man's uniform was immaculate, his medals gleaming in the light. The room was filled with senior officers, all of them standing at attention. The general stood as well, his stern face softening as he saw the veteran. Sergeant Major, he said, his voice firm but filled with respect. It's an honor to have you here. The veteran didn't flinch. He simply nodded, his expression steady. I'm just here to help, sir, he replied. The general took a few steps forward, his eyes fixed on the veteran. You've done more than help today. You've reminded us all what true experience looks like. And for that, I thank you. The room was silent, the tension hanging in the air. The general's gaze never left the old man's face, as if he were searching for something deeper. Finally, the general extended his hand. You're a legend, Sergeant Major, he said quietly. The veteran shook his hand, his grip firm but calm. I don't need recognition, he said. I just do my job. As the general smiled, the other officers in the room exchanged glances, impressed by the humility of the veteran. But there was no doubt in anyone's mind that they had just witnessed the presence of a living legend. The veteran stood, tall, his eyes scanning the room as the general's words lingered in the air. The other officers in the room still stood at attention, their gazes fixed on the sergeant major. No one dared to speak, their respect for the old man palpable. The general, his expression calm but filled with respect, finally broke the silence. Sergeant Major, your reputation precedes you. But there is one thing I need from you now. The veteran's eyes met his, a steady, unflinching gaze. And what might that be, sir? He asked, his voice low but clear. The general motioned for the officers to take a seat, and he himself returned to his desk, his posture commanding yet composed. We have a situation, the general began, his tone shifting slightly. One of our fighter jets, the F-22 Raptor, has suffered a catastrophic failure. Our top engineers have been working on it for days with no success. We need someone who can fix it, and frankly, we're out of options. The engineers, despite their best efforts, haven't been able to diagnose the problem. And I think you know why I'm asking you. The room was deathly silent, all eyes on the veteran. He stood still for a moment, letting the words sink in. You want me to fix it, sir, he said simply. The general nodded, his gaze unwavering. Yes, Sergeant Major. I trust you can handle this. Without hesitation, the veteran nodded in return. Show me the plane, he said. As the officers scrambled to make arrangements, the general's aide quickly led the veteran out of the command center and toward the hangar. The veteran, now fully engaged, walked with purpose, his hands folded behind his back. As they arrived at the hangar, the veteran was met by a team of engineers and senior officers. The F-22 stood silently in the center, its sleek design unmistakable. But its silence was a sharp contrast to the usual hum of power that surrounded the aircraft. We've tried everything, one of the engineers explained, his voice tinged with frustration. The flight control systems, the avionics, the engines, all systems are showing as operational, but it won't start. We're out of ideas. The veteran's eyes scanned the jet, taking in the details that the engineers had missed. He didn't speak for a moment, simply walking around the aircraft, inspecting it from every angle. The techs watched him, some with skepticism, others with a newfound respect. The old man, despite his age and humble appearance, exuded a quiet confidence that was impossible to ignore. After a few moments of silence, the veteran knelt down beside the jet's engine compartment. His experienced hands moved with purpose, his fingers feeling for what the technology had missed. One of the younger engineers, eager to contribute, stepped forward. You won't find anything there, he said. We've already checked that. But the veteran didn't respond. He simply continued his work, his hands expertly tracing the lines of the engine. Then, without warning, he stopped and pointed at a small, seemingly insignificant component. This is where your problem is, he said. The techs looked at each other in confusion. That's the secondary fuel pump, one of them explained. It's operational. The diagnostics show it's fine. The veteran stood up slowly, his gaze unwavering. It's not about whether it's operational. It's about whether it's working properly under pressure. You didn't check the seals. You didn't check the fuel flow under load. The young engineer, now visibly shaken, walked over to inspect the component. To his surprise, the seals were worn, and there was a significant drop in fuel flow when tested. I didn't even think to check that, he muttered. The veteran looked at him, his expression unreadable. You'll learn, he said quietly. You can't rely solely on machines. You have to understand the heart of the machine. With practiced precision, the veteran removed the faulty component, replacing it with a part from his own kit. The entire hangar seemed to hold its breath as he worked. When the part was replaced, the veteran nodded to the engineers. Start it up. The engineers hesitated but complied, powering up the F-22. The jet's engines hummed to life with a smooth, powerful roar. The techs watched in stunned silence as the aircraft systems powered up and stabilized. You did it, one of the engineers whispered. The veteran gave a small nod, his expression still calm. It's not magic, he said. It's just experience. As the jet taxied toward the runway, the officers and engineers stood there, awestruck by the veteran's skill. The general approached, his face filled with admiration. You've saved us again, Sergeant Major, he said. The veteran, ever humble, simply nodded. Just doing my job, sir. The general extended his hand, and this time, the veteran shook it with a firm grip, his eyes meeting the general's. Your job is something none of us could do. For that, we thank you. The veteran nodded, then turned and walked toward the hangar doors, his job done. The technicians and officers, left in silence, could only watch as the living legend walked away, his presence a reminder of the invaluable experience that still had a place in the world of cutting-edge technology. As the veteran walked away from the hangar, the hum of the F-22's engines echoed behind him, a testament to the work he had just done. The general watched him go, his face hard but respectful. The veteran didn't need accolades or praise, and he certainly didn't need to be in the spotlight. He had done his job, and that was enough. But for everyone else present, the moment was unforgettable. In a world where machines were supposed to do the heavy lifting, the veteran had shown them something even more powerful: experience, instinct, and the wisdom that only comes from years of hard work. The general turned to his officers, his voice calm but firm. Make sure to brief the team. This is a lesson we can't afford to forget. There are times when technology alone won't get the job done. Sometimes, you need to trust the people who've been there before. The officers nodded in agreement, their respect for the old man deepening with every word. As the general and his staff moved to debrief the engineers and the jet's recovery, the young technician who had first doubted the veteran's abilities lingered behind. He stood at the edge of the hangar, watching the veteran disappear into the distance. The young man, once full of arrogant confidence, now felt small. It was the kind of humbling experience that stays with you, shaping the way you see the world. The veteran hadn't just fixed a jet, he had fixed something deeper inside of him. And in that moment, the young technician knew he had a long way to go before he could even begin to fill the shoes of someone like that. As the day went on, the airfield was quieter than usual. The F-22 was now running smoothly, its powerful engines purring like a well-oiled machine. But even more than that, the technicians were different. They were more focused, more alert, and perhaps most importantly, more respectful. It wasn't just because of the jet's successful recovery. It was because they had seen firsthand the value of the veteran's knowledge. The night came slowly to the airfield, and the veteran found himself back at his humble quarters, sitting at a worn desk, the faint glow of a lamp casting long shadows across the room. The weight of the day was starting to settle in, but his mind was clear. He had done what he had always done. He had solved a problem, one that no machine could. The faint sound of a knock on his door broke the silence. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. "Sergeant Major?" The voice came from the other side. "Yes," he replied, standing slowly, his joints stiff from the long day. The door creaked open, and the young technician who had been struggling earlier stepped in, his eyes wide with uncertainty. I just wanted to say thank you," the young man said, his voice tentative. The veteran gave a small nod, his face expressionless but his eyes soft. "It's nothing," he said quietly. "You've got a long road ahead of you. Keep your head down, keep learning, and never stop asking questions." The young man shifted uneasily, unsure of what to say next. I didn't understand how much you had seen, how much you knew," he admitted, his words coming slowly. "I thought I could do it all with the tools. But you saw something that we missed. I guess I just wanted to say I'm sorry for doubting you." The veteran looked at him, his expression unchanged. "We all doubt ourselves sometimes," he said, his voice calm. "The important part is what you do after that doubt. You learn from it. You become better. And you pass it on." The technician nodded slowly, the weight of the veteran's words sinking in. He was beginning to understand what the old man had meant. It wasn't just about fixing machines. It was about passing on the lessons learned from years of hard work, from moments of failure and success alike. The young technician looked up, a new sense of respect in his eyes. "Thank you, Sergeant Major. I won't forget this." The veteran gave a small nod. "I'm sure you won't." As the young man left, the veteran returned to his chair, the evening stretching on in front of him. There were no medals, no celebrations, and no grand speeches. But the knowledge that he had taught someone something they would carry with them for the rest of their life, that was enough for him. The world might move on to new technologies, new machines, but there would always be a place for those who understood the old ways. And in a small way, the veteran had made sure that those lessons would never be forgotten. As the days passed, the veteran's actions continued to ripple throughout the airbase. The F-22 had been repaired, and the technicians were back at their posts, but something was different. They were more focused, more diligent, and most importantly, they respected the work that had come before them. The young technician who had once doubted the veteran now walked with a newfound confidence, but also humility, carrying the lessons he had learned in the quiet corners of the hangar. For the veteran, though, it was business as usual. He continued to work on small maintenance tasks around the base, fixing engines, restoring old equipment, and teaching those who were willing to learn. But there was something unspoken between him and the others now, a sense of shared respect that could not be ignored. One morning, as the veteran was walking across the tarmac toward the hangar, he was approached by a familiar face, the general. The officer's posture was straighter than usual, and his eyes held a gleam of determination. "Sergeant Major," the general said, his voice serious. "I need you to come with me." The veteran raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, following the general as they walked towards a military vehicle parked at the far end of the airfield. They climbed into the back, and the vehicle started up, taking them off the main base, away from the busy runways and hangars. The veteran remained silent as the scenery passed by, his mind focused on the conversation that was about to unfold. As they drove through the base gates, the general finally spoke again. "I'm assigning you to a special task," he said. "There's a plane in the fleet that's been having trouble. It's a complicated issue. No one has been able to fix it. The techs are stumped, and the higher-ups don't know where to turn." The veteran looked at the general, his gaze sharp. "What plane is it?" The general hesitated for a moment. "It's a B-52 Stratofortress," he said quietly. The veteran's eyes narrowed. "A bomber?" The general nodded. "Yes. It's been in service for decades, but it still holds a critical role in our fleet. But the engines have been failing. The engineers can't figure it out. I need you to fix it." The veteran thought for a moment, his face unreadable. "I see," he said. "You want me to fix a bomber." The general's voice softened, just slightly. "I've seen your work. You've done the impossible before, and I trust you can do it again." The veteran didn't respond immediately. He simply sat back in the seat, his mind already shifting gears. The B-52 was a complex machine, built for long-range missions and carrying some of the most powerful weapons in the world. It wasn't a fighter jet or a small prop plane. It was a beast of a machine, requiring a level of knowledge and precision that few could ever achieve. "When do I start?" the veteran finally asked, his voice calm and steady. "As soon as we get there," the general replied. The drive was longer than expected, and the veteran spent the time preparing himself mentally for the task ahead. When they arrived at the hangar, the B-52 stood in the center, its massive frame dwarfing the smaller aircraft nearby. A team of engineers was already gathered around, their faces filled with frustration and exhaustion. The veteran stepped out of the vehicle, his eyes scanning the bomber from a distance. The general followed him, his face hard. "This is the plane," he said. "It's been grounded for over a week now. The techs can't find the problem, but we need it operational as soon as possible." The veteran walked slowly toward the plane, his hands folding behind his back as he took in the sight of the aging aircraft. He could hear the murmurs of the engineers, who were clearly watching him, hoping for a miracle. The veteran stopped just short of the bomber, his eyes tracing the lines of the massive engines. He didn't say a word at first, just stood there, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he moved. His hands were quick and precise as he approached the first engine, his fingers working with the same fluidity as when he had fixed the F-22. The engineers watched in silence, their eyes wide with disbelief. The veteran didn't waste time explaining his actions. He simply worked. After several minutes of focused inspection, he turned to the engineers. "Start the engine," he said quietly. The engineers hesitated but complied, powering up the massive jet engine. It sputtered at first, then roared to life, its turbines spinning smoothly. The veteran nodded, then moved to the next engine. The process repeated, his steady hands finding the issues that no one else had noticed, his experienced eyes spotting what had been overlooked. As the last engine fired up, the veteran stepped back and wiped his hands on his coveralls. The B-52's engines were running again, and it was ready to take flight. The engineers stood still, their mouths agape, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. "It's done," the veteran said, his voice calm. The general stepped forward, his eyes wide with awe. "You did it," he said, his voice full of respect. The veteran nodded, his expression unchanged. "It's just a matter of knowing the machine," he said. The general's face softened, his voice lowering. "Sergeant Major, you're more than just a mechanic. You're a legend, and the military would be lost without men like you." The veteran said nothing. He simply turned and began walking away, his mind already moving on to the next challenge. The engineers and officers watched him go, and for the first time, they understood the true value of experience. The veteran had once again done the impossible. The veteran returned to the base after the B-52 had been successfully repaired, his mind still sharp from the task at hand. It was another day in the life of someone who had seen it all, and yet, it never got easier. Each new challenge, whether it was a fighter jet or a bomber, brought with it the same weight of responsibility. But there was something else, something deeper that kept him going, something that no machine or system could replicate. the sense of duty. The general had been impressed, no doubt, but the veteran knew that this wasn't just about fixing an engine or getting a plane back in the air. It was about what lay beneath the surface, the bond between a veteran and the machines he worked on, the soldiers he served with, and the respect that came from years of experience. As the days went on, the veteran's reputation grew. The technicians who had once doubted him now came to him for advice. The younger officers who had treated him like an old relic now recognized the value of his wisdom. It was as if the very presence of the veteran had changed the atmosphere on the base. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a mentor, a living reminder of what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, and to always be ready. One evening, after a long day of work, the veteran was sitting on the porch of his modest quarters, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the airfield. He had learned to enjoy these moments of solitude, where the world seemed to slow down just enough to allow him to catch his breath. But that night, as the sky darkened and the first stars began to appear, he heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. It was the general again, his steps purposeful and steady. "Sergeant Major," the general greeted, his tone more relaxed than usual. The veteran stood up slowly, wiping his hands on his worn-out shirt. "General," he said quietly, his voice still carrying the weight of 1,000 experiences. The general looked at him with a mixture of admiration and something deeper. "I've got another job for you," he said, his voice tinged with respect. "But it's not like the others." The veteran raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" The general motioned toward the hangar. "We've got a situation. It's a matter of national security, a classified mission, and I need you for it." The veteran didn't hesitate. "What's the mission?" The general's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, the weight of the world seemed to press down on them both. "It's a rescue operation," he said. "We've got a pilot stranded in enemy territory. A Black Hawk helicopter was downed, and the rescue team needs someone who knows the terrain, someone who can handle anything thrown their way. We need someone like you." The veteran's heart beat a little faster, but his expression didn't change. "You're asking me to go back into the field." The general nodded, his eyes unwavering. "We need someone who has the experience, someone who understands what it takes to survive out there. You're the only one we trust." The veteran stood silently for a moment, his mind racing. He had spent years in combat, in places where the very air seemed to choke the life out of you. He had seen things that no man should ever see, and he had survived. But it had been years since he had been in the field, since he had been in the heart of battle. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady, his mind clear. The general smiled, the respect in his eyes evident. "I knew you would be. We leave at dawn." The veteran nodded, the weight of the decision settling on him. He didn't have to think twice. He knew what was at stake, and he knew that no matter how much time had passed, the job still had to be done. As the general walked away, the veteran stood there for a moment longer, looking out over the airfield. The world had changed, but some things never did. He had a job to do, and he would do it, just as he had done countless times before. The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the veteran found himself back in uniform, his gear packed, and his mind focused. The mission was clear. The pilot needed to be rescued, and he was the one to do it. The helicopter lifted off from the base, the veteran sitting silently in the back, his mind sharp and his body ready. The engines roared as they soared into the sky, heading toward the unknown. There would be no hesitation, no second-guessing. It was just another mission, just another day in the life of a man who had seen it all. But this time, the stakes were higher, and the veteran knew that when he was called upon, he would answer. The Black Hawk was out there, waiting to be saved, and he would be the one to do it. The helicopter flew steadily through the morning sky, cutting through the air with precision. Inside, the veteran sat quietly, his eyes focused on the terrain below. The mission was clear: rescue a downed pilot in hostile territory. There were no second thoughts, no hesitation, just the hum of the helicopter's engines and the calm in the veteran's mind. He had done this countless times before. The only difference now was the passage of time. He was no longer the young, cocky soldier he had been. He was older, wiser, but still the same man when it came to a mission. As the helicopter approached the area where the Black Hawk had gone down, the veteran's gaze never wavered from the window. The rugged landscape stretched out below, mountains, dense forests, and jagged terrain. A place where many had failed before. But not him. He had learned the land, the weather, and the enemy over years of hard-fought experience. The chopper began its descent, hovering just above the ground. The moment had arrived. As they neared the crash site, the veteran could see the wreckage of the Black Hawk in the distance. The smoke had long since dissipated, but the twisted metal remained as a reminder of the danger they were about to face. "Stay sharp," the pilot's voice crackled over the comms. "We're close." The veteran nodded, his hand resting on the rifle at his side. He didn't need to respond. His actions would speak louder than any words could. As the helicopter touched down in a clearing, the veteran was the first to jump out. His boots hit the soft earth, and he immediately took a knee, scanning the surroundings. The air was thick with tension, and he could feel the weight of the mission on his shoulders. His training kicked in. Every sense was heightened. He moved like a shadow, quick and silent, moving toward the wreckage with steady precision. The pilot, a young officer who had never seen the kind of combat the veteran had, followed closely behind. The veteran didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel the officer's nervous energy, but that wasn't something they could afford right now. They were a team, and his job was to lead. The wreckage of the Black Hawk was as bad as the veteran had feared. The pilot, however, was alive. Just barely. The veteran's eyes scanned the area. No signs of immediate enemy movement, but the danger was still there. They had to move fast. He reached the pilot, his face pale but conscious, clutching his leg. "You're going to be fine," the veteran said calmly as he crouched down beside him. "We'll get you out of here." The pilot winced, clearly in pain, but nodded. "I knew you'd come," he muttered. The veteran didn't respond. He just worked, his hands moving with the ease of someone who had been in this situation too many times to count. He quickly assessed the wound, stopped the bleeding, and secured the pilot's gear. There was no room for error. The veteran stood up and signaled to the pilot. "We're going back to the chopper. Stay close." The journey back to the helicopter was treacherous, with the thick forest offering no cover from potential enemy fire. But the veteran led the way, his movements swift and sure, while the pilot limped behind him, leaning heavily on him for support. As they neared the helicopter, the veteran's instincts told him something was off. A rustling in the bushes. The veteran froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. His eyes scanned the area, and that's when he saw them. Figures emerging from the shadows, armed and intent on intercepting them. The veteran quickly assessed the situation. There were at least 5, maybe 6, armed men approaching. They were heavily camouflaged, moving swiftly through the dense forest. The veteran's heart rate didn't increase. His hand moved smoothly to his rifle, his mind calculating the best course of action. "Cover me," he ordered the young pilot, who had made it to the helicopter and was now crouching behind it. The veteran moved quickly, taking cover behind a large tree. He could hear the enemy closing in, but he didn't panic. His experience had taught him patience. The men were still unaware of his position. He waited, and when the time was right, he struck. His rifle fired 3 quick, controlled shots. The first enemy went down immediately. The second barely had time to react before he, too, fell. The remaining men scrambled for cover, but the veteran was already on the move. He moved silently, methodically, taking out each enemy one by one with deadly precision. Within moments, the area was silent again, the threat neutralized. The veteran approached the helicopter once more, his pace steady but quick. "We're clear," he called out to the pilot, who had been watching from behind the cover. The pilot, still in shock from what had just happened, nodded gratefully. The veteran didn't wait for thanks. He helped the pilot into the helicopter and quickly gave orders to the pilot to take off. As the helicopter lifted off, the veteran allowed himself a moment of reflection. They had made it out. The pilot was safe, and the mission had been a success. But the veteran knew better than to let his guard down. The enemy was always out there, always waiting. It was a fact of life he had learned long ago. As the helicopter ascended into the sky, the veteran looked out over the land they had just crossed. The mountains stretched out endlessly, a reminder of the challenges still ahead. But he was ready. He always would be. The helicopter soared through the sky, leaving the rugged terrain far behind. The veteran sat silently in the back, watching the landscape stretch out beneath them. The mission was over, but the adrenaline still buzzed in his veins. He had completed another task, another mission. The pilot, his legs still aching from the earlier injury, sat in the cockpit, his eyes occasionally glancing back at the veteran with a look of gratitude. But the veteran didn't seek praise. He had done what was needed. The Black Hawk was behind them now, safely on its way to the nearest military hospital, and the enemy was nothing more than a memory. The sky was clear, and the helicopter's engines hummed steadily. But despite the calm, the veteran's mind was already calculating his next move. There would always be another mission, another challenge to face. It was the life he had chosen, and one he couldn't escape. As the helicopter approached the base, the veteran's thoughts drifted to the young officer who had been assigned to the mission with him. The pilot had shown promise, but there was still much he needed to learn. The veteran had seen that same eagerness in so many younger soldiers over the years. They all had something to prove. They all wanted to be the best, but they didn't yet understand what that truly meant. It wasn't just about following orders or making it through a mission unscathed. It was about learning from your failures, acknowledging your mistakes, and always being ready for the next challenge. That was the true test of strength. The veteran's hand subconsciously rested on the rifle next to him. He had carried this weapon, and others like it, through countless missions over the years. It had become an extension of him, a tool for survival, a companion on the battlefield. But today, it was just a reminder of the life he had lived. The chopper touched down on the base with a gentle thud. The engine slowed, and the sound of the rotors cutting through the air gradually faded. The veteran stood up, stretching his stiff muscles. The familiar hum of the base greeted him as he stepped out onto the tarmac. The general was waiting for him, standing with a few of his officers nearby. The veteran approached him without hesitation, his steps measured and deliberate. "Mission accomplished, Sergeant Major?" the general asked, his voice calm but filled with respect. The veteran nodded. "The pilot's safe. The mission was a success." The general nodded, but there was a hint of something more in his eyes. "You did well," he said. "But I need to ask something of you, Sergeant Major. There's another mission. It's different from the others. It's critical." The veteran's eyes narrowed, his instincts kicking in. "What kind of mission?" he asked, his voice low and steady. The general hesitated for a moment before speaking. "We've got a high-value target. An individual who's been causing significant damage to our operations. He's well-guarded and well-protected. We've been trying to get him for months, but he's elusive. This mission requires someone with your experience. Someone who knows how to move undetected." The veteran's eyes never left the general's face. He had been in situations like this before, dangerous missions with high stakes. But he was no stranger to high-risk operations. It was what he had trained for. "What's the plan?" the veteran asked, already preparing himself for what was to come. The general looked around, ensuring no one else was listening. "We'll be going in at night. You'll be leading a small team. We'll need to get close without being detected, take out the target, and get out as quickly as possible. The target is located in a heavily fortified compound, and we'll need to move fast." The veteran nodded slowly, his mind already processing the details. "When do we leave?" The general's voice was firm. "As soon as possible. We can't afford to waste time. The longer we wait, the more likely it is that he'll slip away again." The veteran didn't need to be told twice. He had already seen what happened when an opportunity was missed. He had lost soldiers before, and he wasn't about to let that happen again. The general motioned for his officers to step forward, handing the veteran a set of maps. "And intelligence reports. This is everything we know. We've got eyes on the compound, but the terrain is rough. It's going to be a tough infiltration." The veteran glanced over the maps quickly, his eyes scanning the routes and potential entry points. "I'll make it work," he said simply. He knew the risks. He knew the dangers. But he also knew that he had faced worse. The general watched him, a mix of admiration and concern in his eyes. "I trust you, Sergeant Major. We're counting on you." The veteran gave a small nod. "I won't let you down, sir." He turned and began walking toward the hangar, where the team was assembling. The mission was about to begin, and the veteran was ready. As he moved, he felt the weight of his past, the years of experience that had shaped him into the man he was. This was what he had been trained for. He had been through worse, and he would get through this too. The helicopter was already prepped for departure. The team was waiting, gear in hand. The veteran looked at them, sizing them up. They were young, eager, and ready to prove themselves. But they would soon learn the truth. It wasn't about being fast or strong. It was about knowing when to act, when to wait, and when to rely on your instincts. As the helicopter lifted off, The veteran settled back in his seat, his mind focused. He knew what was at stake, but he also knew that he had done this before, and he would do it again. The mission was underway, and the veteran's mind was sharp, focused. The helicopter flew through the cool night air, its silhouette barely visible against the starry sky. He could feel the familiar hum of the engines beneath him, but his mind wasn't on the flight. His thoughts were on the mission ahead, the men and women he would lead, and the objective that lay before them. The compound they were heading to was heavily fortified. Intelligence suggested that the target was well protected, surrounded by armed guards and thick security measures. But the veteran had seen worse. He knew the terrain, he understood the risks, and above all, he trusted his instincts. The young officers sitting in the back with him seemed nervous, their eyes darting around. They were experienced, but not like him. They hadn't seen the horrors of battle, the decisions that had to be made in the heat of the moment. The veteran had lived through it all. He had learned that in war, hesitation meant death. There was no room for doubt. They were nearing the drop zone now, and the veteran leaned forward, his hand resting on his gear, making sure everything was in place. The pilot spoke through the intercom, his voice calm but tense. "We're coming up on the drop point. Get ready." The veteran nodded. "You heard him," he said to the team. "Move quickly, stay quiet, and follow my lead." The helicopter began its descent, the wind howling as the trees below became more defined in the night. The veteran's heart rate remained steady, his breath slow and controlled. As the helicopter landed in a clearing just outside the compound, the door slid open, and the team immediately sprang into action. They moved in silence, no words spoken, only the sound of boots on dirt and the rustle of equipment. The veteran led the way, his eyes scanning the perimeter for any signs of movement. His team followed closely behind, doing their best to stay out of sight. The compound was ahead of them, the faint glow of lights visible through the trees. As they neared the outer fence, the veteran signaled for them to stop. He crouched low, motioning for the others to do the same. He studied the area carefully, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. The guards were patrolling the compound's perimeter, but there were gaps in their routine, small windows of opportunity. The veteran knew they had to be swift. "We move in 10, he whispered. The team nodded, preparing their weapons and checking their gear. The veteran's mind was already on the next step, the next move. He didn't need to think about the consequences. He had to act. When the time came, the veteran led the charge, darting from cover to cover, moving with the fluidity of someone who had spent years in combat. His team followed his lead, their movements coordinated and precise. They reached the outer wall without incident, and the veteran quickly scaled the fence, helping the others up one by one. Once inside the compound, the veteran held up a fist, signaling the team to halt. He could hear the guards' voices in the distance, their silhouettes moving along the patrol route. He watched them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His heart rate remained steady, his focus absolute. They couldn't afford a mistake. They had one chance. As the guards passed, the veteran made his move, silently taking down the first one with a swift strike to the neck. The others followed his lead, neutralizing the remaining guards before they could raise an alarm. The veteran moved quickly through the compound, his team close behind. The mission was almost complete. They reached the building where the target was being held. The veteran's hand instinctively went to the door, checking for traps, but it was clear. He signaled to the team to breach. The door crashed open, and the team flooded inside. The target was there, exactly where intelligence had said he would be. He was shackled to a chair, his eyes wide with fear. The veteran stepped forward, his voice low but authoritative. "You're coming with us," he said. The target didn't resist. He knew who was standing in front of him. The veteran was a name that struck fear in the hearts of many. As the team secured the target, the veteran checked the room for any more threats. Satisfied, he motioned for them to move out. They made their way back to the extraction point, moving quickly but cautiously. The compound was still silent, the mission a success. As they neared the helicopter, the veteran glanced at the target, who was now bound and gagged, ready to be taken back to base for interrogation. "Job's done," the veteran said quietly to his team. The extraction was clean, the helicopter lifting off into the sky with no further resistance. As they flew back to base, the veteran allowed himself a moment of relief. Another mission completed, another victory. But he knew the truth. There was always another mission, always another target. The war was never over. He had done what was needed, but the price of war was always the same. A constant, unrelenting cycle of duty, sacrifice, and survival. As the base came into view, the veteran's eyes never left the horizon. He had faced countless enemies, fought through the toughest battles, but one thing always remained constant: the job. And when the mission called, he would always answer. The veteran stood at the edge of the runway, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The mission was over, the target safely in custody, but there was no sense of victory, no sense of relief. He had done his job, and that was all. It was what he had been trained for, what he had been doing for decades. The helicopter that had carried them back to base had already taken off again, the noise of its rotors fading into the distance. The silence of the base felt deafening. His team had completed the mission without incident, but they hadn't seen what he had seen, felt what he had felt. The adrenaline was still coursing through his veins, but it was a numb kind of rush. The kind that only came after a job well done. It wasn't satisfaction that followed him. It was something more haunting, more familiar. He had learned long ago to bury the emotions, to lock them away. There was no room for them in the line of duty. As he turned to head back to the barracks, a familiar figure approached him. The general. The officer's face was as hard as ever, but there was something different in his eyes. A quiet respect. "Sergeant Major," the general called, his voice low but firm. The veteran stopped, his gaze meeting the general's. "Sir." The general nodded, a slight gesture that spoke volumes. "I've been briefed on the mission's success," he said, his voice calm. "You did what was needed. But I need to ask something of you." The veteran raised an eyebrow, waiting. "What is it, sir?" The general paused for a moment before continuing. "There's another mission coming up," he said, his voice steady. "It's high priority. We need someone with your experience. Someone who can think on their feet, who can lead under pressure." The veteran's heart rate didn't skip a beat. Another mission. Another target. He had heard those words too many times before. But this time, there was something different in the general's tone. It was more than just a mission. It was a call for something bigger. The veteran took a slow breath, his thoughts already turning to the task ahead. "What's the target?" he asked. The general's gaze hardened. "A high-profile enemy leader. He's been a thorn in our side for years. We've been trying to take him down for months. But this mission is different. We have to get him, no matter the cost." The veteran nodded slowly. He didn't need to be told twice. He had seen what happened when a target slipped through the cracks. When someone failed. It was never just a failure, it was a personal loss. And he wasn't about to let that happen again. "I'll need the full briefing," he said, his voice steady. The general handed him a folder. "Everything you need is inside. We're launching tonight. Time is of the essence." The veteran took the folder, his eyes scanning the contents briefly before he tucked it under his arm. "I'll be ready." With that, the general turned and walked away, leaving the veteran standing alone on the runway. He stood there for a moment longer, the weight of the mission settling on his shoulders. It wasn't about the glory, the recognition, or the victory. It was about the job, the target, the mission, and when it came down to it, there was no one else who could do it better. As he made his way back to his quarters, the veteran's mind was already working, analyzing the situation, planning the strategy. It wasn't the first time he had been asked to do something dangerous, but this time, the stakes were higher. The enemy leader was a powerful man, one with a well-guarded compound and a network of loyal soldiers willing to die for him. It wasn't going to be easy, but the veteran didn't expect it to be. He had learned long ago that nothing worth doing was ever easy. Back in his quarters, the veteran quickly packed his gear. His rifle was cleaned and ready, the magazines filled, the equipment checked and double-checked. His movements were methodical, practiced, and efficient. He had done this countless times, but it never lost its edge. There was always a sense of tension, a sense of anticipation before a mission. He had learned to embrace it. It was the fire that fueled him, the reason he could push through the toughest situations. As he finished packing, he stood up, adjusting his uniform. There was no time to waste. He had a mission to complete. The veteran left his quarters and made his way to the helicopter. His team was already gathered, waiting for him. They looked to him for leadership, for direction, and he wouldn't let them down. As he climbed into the helicopter, the weight of the mission settled once more. But this time, there was something else, a quiet determination. He wasn't just going to complete the mission. He was going to finish it. And he was going to make sure that this time, there would be no mistakes. As the helicopter lifted off, the veteran looked out at the base below, the lights of the tarmac fading away beneath them. It was time to face the enemy once again. And this time, there would be no escape. The helicopter soared through the sky, its engines humming steadily as it cut through the thick night air. The veteran sat silently in the back, his eyes scanning the darkness below. The mission was close now, and the target was within reach. His thoughts were sharp, his focus unwavering. This was what he had trained for. This was what he had spent decades preparing for. The team was quiet, each of them gearing up for what lay ahead, but the veteran could feel the unease in the air. They were all eager, but he knew the weight of what was coming. This was no ordinary mission. The stakes were higher. The compound they were heading to was more heavily fortified than any they had faced before. And the target, the enemy leader, was one of the most dangerous men they had ever encountered. He had built an empire on fear and blood, and his followers would die to protect him. But the veteran had faced far worse in his time. As the helicopter neared the compound, the veteran's eyes narrowed. He could see the outline of the compound in the distance, the harsh lights illuminating the perimeter. The closer they got, the more he felt the tension in the air. This was the moment. 5 minutes out, the pilot's voice crackled through the comms. The veteran's hand tightened around his rifle. It was time. He stood up, moving quietly through the helicopter's cabin to the door. The rest of the team followed suit, each of them checking their gear, ensuring everything was in place. The veteran didn't need to say a word. His presence was enough. The men and women under his command respected him not just for his skill, but for the calm confidence he exuded in the face of danger. The helicopter began its descent, the rotors whipping through the air, stirring up a cloud of dust and debris below. The veteran watched. As the ground grew closer, his mind already calculating the best route to approach the compound. The helicopter touched down with a soft thud, and the team moved quickly, disembarking in a well-practiced formation. They had no time to waste. The veteran was the first to move, his footsteps light but sure as he led the team toward the perimeter wall. They moved like shadows, silent and quick, with only the sound of their boots hitting the ground. As they reached the wall, the veteran signaled for them to stop. He crouched down, his eyes scanning the compound, looking for any sign of movement. The guards were patrolling in a steady rhythm, their figures just visible in the dim light. The veteran had learned to read these patterns over the years. He knew when to move and when to wait. He gestured for the team to follow him, and they slipped through the gap in the wall, moving silently into the compound. Inside, the compound was eerily quiet. The walls were lined with barbed wire, and the air was thick with tension. The veteran's instincts kicked in as he moved through the shadows, his eyes scanning every corner, every doorway. His team followed, staying close, but he could feel their eyes on him. They were looking to him for guidance, for the calm leadership that had gotten them this far. The veteran led them through the compound, taking out guards silently as they moved deeper into enemy territory. Each strike was precise, calculated. They couldn't afford any mistakes. As they neared the building where the target was believed to be, the veteran signaled for the team to stop. He checked the door, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingers. It was locked, but that was nothing he couldn't handle. He took out his tools and silently worked the lock, the team watching and waiting. It only took a few moments before the door creaked open. The veteran motioned for the team to follow, and they slipped inside. The building was dark, the only light coming from a few flickering overhead bulbs. The target was close now. The veteran's mind was clear, his thoughts focused entirely on the mission. He could feel the weight of the moment, but he didn't let it affect him. This was what he had been trained to do. He had done it all before. The veteran moved through the building with precision, leading the team down a narrow hallway. The target's location was just ahead. He could feel the tension building, but he kept his steps measured and controlled. As they reached the final door, the veteran stopped, his hand resting on the handle. He looked back at the team, his eyes calm, his expression unreadable. "Stay quiet," he whispered. The team nodded in unison. The veteran pushed open the door, and they flooded into the room. The target was there, sitting at a desk, surrounded by maps and documents. His eyes widened as he saw the team enter, but there was no time for fear. The veteran was already on him. In one swift motion, he disarmed the man and had him on the ground, his rifle aimed directly at him. "You're coming with us," the veteran said, his voice low but firm. The target didn't resist. He knew who the veteran was. He knew he was facing the last person he wanted to face. The veteran's team quickly secured the target, their movements efficient and precise. The job was done, but the veteran didn't feel relief. The mission was successful, but the war was far from over. He had completed his part, but there would always be another mission, another target, another fight. As the team moved toward the extraction point, the veteran's mind remained focused. There was no time for celebration. The job wasn't over until they were back at base. As they reached the extraction point, the helicopter waited, the rotors already spinning. The veteran glanced at his team. They were tired, but they were ready. They had done their job. And now, so had he. The helicopter roared to life once more, lifting off from the extraction point with a smooth, practiced motion. The veteran sat in the back, his hands resting on his knees, his mind still processing the events of the mission. The target was in custody, the job was done, and yet there was no sense of victory. It was another mission completed, another job checked off the list. But to the veteran, it never felt like enough. As the helicopter soared through the sky, heading back to base, the team was silent. They had all seen what they had come for, and they knew that in the end, it was just another day in the field. The young officers were still processing the experience, the adrenaline of the mission still fresh in their veins. The veteran, however, had long learned to suppress the adrenaline. He didn't need it anymore. He had been through too much, seen too much to rely on the rush. His mind was already preparing for the next mission, the next challenge. Back at base, the veteran's boots hit the tarmac, the familiar sound echoing in the quiet night. The rest of the team followed behind, still alert, but visibly relieved. They had done their job. The veteran knew that, but he also knew that no matter how many times they completed a mission, there was always another one waiting. Another target. Another fight. As they walked toward the briefing room, the veteran could feel the weight of his years pressing down on him. He had been in this game too long, and while the younger soldiers came and went, he remained. There was no turning back. He had given too much, sacrificed too much to ever leave. He had made peace with it long ago. The general was waiting for them in the briefing room, his face hard as usual. But when his eyes landed on the veteran, there was a brief flicker of something else, something akin to respect. "Sergeant Major," the general said, his voice steady but filled with gratitude. "Mission complete. We couldn't have done it without you." The veteran didn't respond right away. He just stood there, looking at the general with his usual calm expression. "It's what I do," he said finally, his voice low. "It's my job." The general nodded, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Well, you do it better than anyone. And we're lucky to have you." The veteran didn't acknowledge the compliment. He had heard it before. He knew his worth. The general continued, his tone shifting slightly. "We've got another operation coming up, something bigger than usual. You'll be briefed in due time. For now, take a break, Sergeant Major. You've earned it." The veteran didn't need to be told twice. He gave a small nod and turned toward the door. He didn't need rest. He didn't need thanks. But even he knew when it was time to step back and let others take the spotlight. He stepped outside into the cool air, the night stretching out before him. He took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of the world on his shoulders. But this time, there was something different in the air. A feeling of impending change, of something bigger coming down the line. The veteran couldn't shake the feeling that the next mission would be unlike any he had faced before. But he wasn't afraid. He never had been. As the veteran walked away from the briefing room, his mind shifted back to the younger officers who had worked with him on the mission. They had performed well, but he knew they still had a lot to learn. They had followed his lead, but they didn't yet understand the depth of the job, the experience, the sacrifice, the quiet weight of being in the field, day in and day out. The veteran had long accepted the toll it took on him, his body, his soul. But that was the price he had paid for the life he had chosen. As he walked toward his quarters, the faint sound of footsteps echoed behind him. He didn't have to turn to know it was one of the younger officers. "Sergeant Major," the officer called out, his voice tentative. The veteran turned slowly, his eyes meeting the officer's. "What is it?" The officer hesitated, then spoke again. "I just wanted to thank you. For everything. You led us through that mission, kept us focused, and we made it out alive because of you. I know it's just your job, but it means a lot to me." The veteran regarded the officer for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He had heard these words before, from others. But this time, something in the officer's voice made him pause. "You did well," the veteran said quietly. "But don't think for a second that it's over. There's always more. Always another mission. Always another fight." The officer nodded, understanding the weight of the words. "I get it. I'll be ready." The veteran gave a small nod before turning and walking toward his quarters. The officer stood there for a moment, watching him go. The words of the veteran would stay with him forever, shaping the way he would approach his next mission. The veteran's steps were steady, his mind already working on the next task at hand. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't help but wonder if this time, the mission, would be different, if it would finally be the one to push him to his limits. But for now, he pushed those thoughts aside. He had done his part, and he would be ready for whatever came next. The veteran sat at the edge of his bed, the mission briefing still fresh in his mind. His gear was neatly packed, ready for whatever came next, but his mind was somewhere else. The feeling he had been avoiding for years had finally crept in. For the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of the years pressing down on him. His hands were still steady, his mind still sharp, but the years of constant battle, the toll it had taken on him, were beginning to show. The war had always been there, but now, as the new mission loomed closer, something in him wondered if he was still the man he once was. He had been through countless operations, countless moments where his life hung by a thread, and each time, he had pulled through. But this time, there was something different in the air. The veteran couldn't ignore it. The door to his quarters creaked open, and the general stepped in, his face as stoic as always. "Sergeant Major," he said, his voice measured. "We're preparing for the next mission." The veteran nodded slowly, standing up and moving toward the table where his rifle and equipment were laid out. "I'm ready, sir," he said, his voice steady, but there was a flicker of uncertainty behind his eyes. The general seemed to notice, but didn't comment. "I trust you," the general said. "But this one is going to be tougher. We've got word that the enemy has escalated their operations. This will be a decisive blow." The veteran looked at him for a moment. "What do you need from me?" he asked, already knowing the answer. The general stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We need you to lead. The team respects you, but more than that, we need someone who's been through it all. Someone who can see the mission through, no matter the odds." The veteran nodded. It was what he had always done, what he would continue to do. But there was a shift in the air. He had spent so many years as the one who led, the one who made the hard decisions, the one who guided his team through the chaos. But now, as the general stood before him, it hit him harder than ever. He had been carrying this burden alone for far too long. "I'll lead," he said, his voice firm. "Always have." But something in his eyes gave him away. The general noticed. He didn't say anything more, only gave a brief nod before leaving the room. The veteran sat back down, the room suddenly feeling too small. He hadn't let himself feel it before, but now it was clear. He had been running on autopilot for years. The constant missions, the endless cycles of violence, had left their mark. He had always told himself it was part of the job, that it was what he signed up for. But now, as he stared at his reflection in the small mirror, he saw the years in his face. The toll the war had taken. He wasn't the young man who had first stepped into battle. He wasn't even the man who had first joined the service. He was someone else. Someone older, someone weary. He had always kept his emotions in check. He had to. There was no room for weakness in this line of work. But now, as the weight of his years pressed in, he wondered if it was time to stop pretending. As the evening sky darkened outside, the veteran dressed in his gear and stepped out into the cold air. The base was quiet, most of the men and women preparing for the mission ahead. The veteran's footsteps echoed in the stillness as he made his way to the helipad. The team would meet him there, ready to move out. His mind focused back on the task ahead. There was no time to dwell on what he was feeling. The mission needed him, and that was all that mattered. As he arrived at the helipad, the rest of the team was already there, waiting for him. The young officers, eager and ready, looked to him for guidance. They didn't see the weariness in his eyes. To them, he was still the man who had led them through countless battles. He was still the sergeant major they trusted. He stood before them, his face unreadable. "We're going in," he said, his voice steady. "This is a high-priority mission, and we need to move fast. Stay sharp, stay focused, and we'll get through this." His words were calm, But underneath them, there was something more, something that only the veteran knew. He had seen the world change, seen himself change. But one thing remained the same: the mission, the target, the war. As the helicopter took off, the veteran looked out into the distance, the landscape stretching out before him. This time, the mission would be different. But he was ready. He always was. The veteran had learned that you could never escape the war. It followed you, no matter where you went. But as long as there was a mission, as long as there was a reason to fight, he would continue. Until the very end. In this emotional story, we follow the journey of a battle-hardened veteran who has spent decades in service, confronting personal and professional challenges. As the veteran navigates through dangerous missions, a deep sense of duty drives him to push through each obstacle. The emotional story dives into the moments of reflection and sacrifice that come with a life lived on the edge. His resilience is tested in every mission, and through each victory and loss, we see the toll of a lifetime of service. This emotional story showcases the inner struggles and quiet moments of strength that define this veteran's character. From intense combat scenarios to the quiet realization of his own limitations, this emotional story captures the complexity of being a soldier. Throughout his journey, the veteran's actions speak louder than words, proving that sometimes the most emotional stories are those we choose to keep silent. As the veteran faces the harsh realities of war and the weight of his experiences, the emotional story unfolds with raw honesty and intensity.